Good afternoon, everybody who's joining us for today's call. We have a lot of people registered for this call, so we're going to give it a minute to let people log in, and we'll get started in just about a minute. If you've just joined the call, we're waiting for people to log in, and we will get started in about 30 seconds or so. Okay, well, folks are still logging in, but we'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Paul Keeley. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at the National Low Income Housing Coalition. I want to welcome you to today's national call on coronavirus disasters, housing, and homelessness. We have more than 1,000 people, or close to 1,000 people registered for this call from all over the country, including homelessness and housing services providers, advocates, renters, and people who have experienced homelessness, researchers, members of the media, congressional staff, and others. On today's call, we'll be joined by Representative Emanuel Cleaver from Missouri, who's the chair of the House Financial Services Subcommittee on Housing and Community Development and Insurance, Barbara DiPietro of the National Health Care for the Homeless Council will provide an overview of a new framework resource on building healthcare partnerships to meet the needs of people experiencing homelessness. We will also learn about the National COVID-19 Borrower Awareness Campaign, receive updates from the field and the latest from Capitol Hill on the new COVID relief bill and more. So I just want to ask everybody, please, to if you have questions, please submit them in the Q&A box. I'll mostly focus on that for questions that people have. If you'd like to chat with other participants in the call, please feel free to use the chat function. We received quite a few questions before the call. We'll try to get to some of those. I don't think in the call we'll be able to get to all of them, but I will say that NLIC has very comprehensive resources that answer many of the questions that were asked pre-call. For example, is there housing assistance that will be provided retroactively for households for past rent due? The answer is yes, back to March of 2020. And you'll find tons of information on our website about that and many other things. So please do check out our website at nlic.org and go to the coronavirus section for those kinds of questions. We will get to some of them, and we'll get to others that are submitted during the call. So feel free to submit your questions, and we will again try to address them. And they also will inform the frequently asked questions that we have on our website. You'll see many resources there. So do feel free to submit your questions. All right, we're going to get started with an update on what's going on in Capitol Hill from Sarah Sadian, who's the VP for Public Policy at the National Low Income Housing Coalition. Sarah, take it away.
Great. Things are really busy right now on the Hill. Democrats are moving forward with their budget reconciliation process. We've spoken about this before, but just as a refresher, it's a process that allows Congress to pass a bill with a simple majority of votes as opposed to 60 votes that are typically needed for bills. Last week, the House and Senate both passed budget resolutions, which set the top line spending limit for the next COVID relief package. That total dollar amount is set at the same number that President Biden had included in his proposal, $1.9 trillion. So now that that process is over, that budget resolution has been passed, the next step in the process is that each committee has to draft and vote on individual bills in their jurisdictions that after that will be combined all together into one final package. So just in terms of timing, last week, like I said, we saw the budget resolution pass the House and Senate. This week, we're expecting committee votes start on each of the smaller bills that will have to be voted on. Starting next week, we'll see all of those bills combined into one large package, and I'll have to go through the budget committee to do that. And then the following week, the week of February 22nd, we might see a vote on the floor before it heads to the Senate. So things are moving very, very quickly. We also saw last Friday that the House Financial Services Committee released their COVID relief bill. So this is a bill that, if it made it through committee, would be added to that larger COVID relief package that would move through budget reconciliation. And I just want to highlight a few of the items that are in that bill. We are putting together a fact sheet on the legislative text, and hopefully that'll be done by the end of the day today or maybe tomorrow. So the bill includes $25 billion in emergency rental assistance. Of that amount, about $19 billion is provided through the Treasury's Emergency Rental Assistance Program. This is a program that received $25 billion in December. So that would bring up the total amount for that program to about $45 billion. The bill also includes $750 million to address tribal housing needs and $100 million for rural rental housing assistance. It's really important that there are some provisions of the bill that have been improved from the last go round of funding. For example, households can receive assistance up to 18 months. It was a little shorter in last year's bill. The deadline to spend funds have been extended. These funds don't need to be spent until September 2025. So that's a much longer time frame than under the past bill. And eligibility is expanded to cover households that are either experiencing a financial hardship during or due to the pandemic. The bill from last time didn't include during the pandemic. It only limited assistance due to the pandemic, and that caused a lot of problems for folks on the ground. The bill also takes some important steps to looking towards the longer term needs for renters by providing $5 billion, which will provide tens of thousands of emergency vouchers for people experiencing homelessness, at risk of homelessness, or those who are fleeing domestic violence. So we're really glad to see that they're starting to look forward to what those might be. In addition to rental assistance, the bill also includes $5 billion to help people who are currently experiencing homelessness with immediate and long-term assistance. That funding can be used not only to address immediate needs through supportive services and rental assistance, but it can also be used to develop or acquire or convert properties into non-congregate housing, permanent supportive housing, or long-term solutions. That's something that we had pushed for and other folks had pushed for too, about how looking for funding that we could use to acquire hotels and motels that have been used to currently house people experiencing homelessness. That $5 billion can help make a first step towards that end. And lastly, the bill does include assistance for homeowners who are at risk of foreclosure, about $9.96 billion for that purpose that would go through the Homeowner Assistance Fund through Treasury. There's about $100 million for housing counseling and $39 million for USDA rural housing homeowners who received a direct loan through their programs. It's really important to know that the bill does not include an extension or improvements to the eviction moratorium, but that's largely because this mechanism, this budget resolution mechanism, doesn't allow for it to be included. Budget reconciliations can only include dollar amounts, funding levels, and not policy changes. And so it's going to become even more important for President Biden and the CDC director to take steps on the administrative side to provide that sort of protection for workers. Other bills are expected to come out from other committees as soon as today. We are expecting to see $5 billion for utility assistance through the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program, LIHEAP, when that bill is released. We're also expecting to see a major anti-poverty proposal that would come out of the Ways and Means Committee for households that have children in it. They're looking at something like providing about $3,600 annually for households with per child under the age of 6, $3,000 for children between 6 and 17. The details of it aren't known just yet, but that's something that we're really looking towards digging into because obviously that sort of cash assistance would provide a lot of resources for households that are in need and who are struggling to pay their rent. So in terms of next steps, we expect this bill in financial services to be marked up this week. We're hearing that they can start voting on amendments as soon as Wednesday and Thursday, possibly going into Friday. When they're done with that process, they will vote on the bill in committee. We expect it to pass, and it will go to the budget committee from there. In terms of amendments, we have heard that no Democrats are offering any amendments to the financial services bill. A lot of the details of that bill were worked out ahead of time. They want to reduce the number of changes that are made. But we do expect Republicans to offer a number of amendments, largely to put Democrats in a difficult position. I don't know exactly what will be, what amendments will be brought forth, but we're paying very close attention, and we might call on you, especially if you have a member of Congress on the committee, push back against harmful amendments that we see come forward. In terms of other updates, I did want to say we got great news recently about FEMA's, the executive order that directed FEMA to increase the federal cost share for its public assistance program, which has been used to move people experiencing homelessness into hotels and motels. So the executive order directed FEMA to increase that so that the federal government pays 100% of eligible costs. We just found out last week, Diane spoke with folks in the White House and at FEMA, and they have decided to make that retroactive to cover costs that states and local governments have already expended for that purpose. So if there's ever been a reason for you to go back to your state and local governments to encourage them to set up these programs if they haven't already, this is the time to do so, because it would be without expense to them, or 100% of the cost would be covered by the federal government. The other update I want to give folks is that we're still waiting for the Department of Treasury to issue new guidance on its emergency rental assistance program. They have listed the list of state and local governments that have received an allocation, and I'll share a link to that in the chat box. But we are still waiting for them to revise the FAQ, and we're hearing stories about states and local governments designing their programs with that inaccurate, out-of-date FAQ because we're encouraging them to move more quickly. And on that, I'll just pass it back to you, Paul. Thanks so much.
Okay, great. Well, we probably have a minute or two, given the agenda, to ask you a couple of questions. There are many in the Q&A box and others in the chat if you'll have time, and members of your team have time to respond to those. But let me ask you a couple, actually a couple that came in before the call as well. One of those was, when will Congress pass legislation to provide for the construction of new affordable housing with deep subsidy? The demand is overwhelming in our community. Ask this person.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, we were really glad to see that there was $5 billion for that purpose in this bill. That's not, nearly enough compared to what the needs are, but that's a really good starting point. And then our hope is that immediately after Congress passes this COVID relief bill, that they'll turn their attention to a larger infrastructure or stimulus bill. I know we will be pushing for things that really address the underlying structural causes of the housing crisis. So we'll be pushing for things like increased investments in the Housing Trust Fund, in public housing, universal housing vouchers, and other resources that can help build housing for people who have the lowest incomes.
Right. There's another question here. Is there any written documentation that states that states and localities can serve undocumented households with emergency rental assistance treasury dollars?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm going to ask Elena if she can share our resource in the chat box. There is nothing in this provision, and there's nothing in the $25 billion that already passed Congress, and there's nothing in this bill so far that would prohibit undocumented immigrants from being eligible to receive assistance. There also are limitations on what state and local governments can do in the absence of federal decision-making in this space. We've talked to some of our immigration partners who've said that they would prefer not to see Treasury write anything down conclusively. They're worried about Congress, it's bringing a lot of negative attention by Congress to that, and maybe stirring up people who want to change that. But for now, all of you should know that undocumented people are eligible for this assistance, and you can be working with your state and local government to make sure that that's possible.
I'll do one more here real quick. Do the new expanded eligibility requirements for rental assistance apply also to the emergency rental assistance money from the December relief bill? Sarah?
No, it does not. So there are limits about what Congress can do through a budget reconciliation process. And technically under this bill, they can only make changes to money that hasn't already been appropriated by Congress. So they're unable to touch the $25 billion that already passed. These changes would only impact this round of funding.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Sarah. There are more questions if you have time to take a look at the Q&A box and the chat as well. Appreciate the update.
Thanks.
Okay, we will move now to our next presenter, and that is Barbara DiPietro, our close collaborator at the National Healthcare for the Homeless Council on building healthcare partnerships, a new resource to help communities do this. So Barbara, can you take it away?
Great, thank you very much. I think I'm looking for my slides to come up. Oh, very good. Thank you. Appreciate being here. Just wanted to talk and make a 5-minute pitch for a new resource that we've developed in collaboration with the Framework for an Equitable COVID-19 Homelessness Response. Just wanted to put a little bit more of a healthcare framework onto the COVID response. Obviously, this pandemic has illustrated healthcare issues in a way that we've been struggling with for a long time and made them even more poignant. And so this is just our way of trying to put a little bit more practical approaches to what do we mean when we say integrating healthcare and housing? What does that really mean in practice? So in the next slide, really just wanted to talk a little bit about this report that we just did, highlighting 3 communities. And I want to give a shout out to my Healthcare for the Homeless programs in Chicago, the Heartland Alliance Health, in Connecticut, Community Health Center, Inc., and in Atlanta, Mercy Care. They've been working with their COCs, all of Chicago and Chicago, obviously, the Connecticut Coalition to End Homelessness, and Partners for Home in Atlanta, to really try to figure out more systemic ways that they can be working together. And this isn't one-off, like one healthcare provider and one shelter working together. This is how they've managed to really take this pandemic and use it as an opportunity to elevate the connection between shelter and health in particular to a systemic level where now it's part of the community approach. So obviously recognizing that people experiencing homelessness are high risk during all of this, but that we have systemic outcomes that we need to be tracking so that we can be pointing to these collaborations' effectiveness, but also moving the whole system in the direction it needs to go. Obviously using equity as a guiding principle, but really we wanted to look at this as how can all communities replicate the approaches that these 3 communities took. Go to the next slide. And so just a little bit in the next slide about the framework itself, if you're not familiar with this, it's really just trying to put some guidance on how to use all of the resources that are coming out into the community on more effectively ending homelessness. And Sarah just talked a lot about some more things that are hopefully coming to us in the pipeline. So how do we use these together with other healthcare dollars to meet public health goals, get people into housing, and prevent future homelessness? So I've got the link here to the housingequityframework.org, where there's a lot of materials to include this new piece. And I just want to give a huge shout out to my project partners that many of you know. Barb Poppy and Matthew Doherty were really instrumental in this project. And then the Centers for Budget and Policy Priorities as well. And then, of course, the National Low Income Housing Coalition, the Alliance to End Homelessness, the Urban Institute, and the National Innovation Service. You never want to forget to mention all your partners. So really appreciate putting this into that framework. Next slide. And so just real quick, again, this is just a 5-minute pitch to let you know that this is a resource here. But these are the successes that each of these communities have pointed to, particularly the connection to prioritizing permanent housing. And then looking through, you know, Georgia is been, they've got the CDC in their backyard, but they use that to leverage their collaborations with other medical, the Morehouse School of Medicine and Emory University, to really be able to have pervasive service partnerships in the community. And they really affiliate their low COVID infection rate with the partnerships they've been able to put in place. Similarly, in Chicago and the state of Connecticut, linking not just a shelter with a healthcare provider, but making sure that every shelter has a healthcare provider, making sure that we're tracking the outcomes for people's connection into health and their connection to housing at the systemic level. Obviously, the non-congregate programs that many are being, that have been created across the country are now new models of care. And so really the challenge is, how do we continue making this better and not going back to where we were before? So I think some of these are intuitive. Also want to talk about telehealth. For us is really a big expansion into telehealth to reach our patients. But the spaces in shelters and the space in housing programs really give us a place where we can better meet people where they are and deliver more consistent care. I also want to give out a shout out to Chicago, if anyone on the call is from there. They put together a fantastic collaborative called CHARGE, the Chicago Homelessness and Health Response Group for Equity. They have singularly just put together a tremendous partnership where they've established shelter guidelines for the entire city's homeless services system. And I just think that that's a really great project that they were able to complete. Next slide. And I just want to also mention that a lot of these takeaway messages and the keys to success and the advice that they offered for others are the kinds of things that you would probably anticipate people would say. Working together, communicating regularly, making sure that it's clear what the communication lines are. All of this we are learning to do much better during COVID. But I want to point out 3 things here. One is broadening the understanding of healthcare. This goes beyond just getting your client to see a doctor. This is talking about people having access consistently to health education, chronic disease management, medication-assisted treatment, and just a broad range of people who can really help them do crisis intervention, motivational interviewing, and just trying to get people into a better, more stable place. And so thinking of those collaborations with healthcare in that broad context, and then also thinking about standards of care, and not just the consistent package of services that people should expect no matter where they're accessing homeless services. That's clearly one piece. But also, what is the standard of the services that we are delivering? How is it that we are ensuring dignity and trust in the services that we deliver, and making sure that people really, we are trustworthy partners for those that we're serving? And then finally, creating a systems level response, making sure that this is really part of the COC vision. This is part of your community-wide vision for how this can measurable outcomes, connection to community-wide health initiatives. So making sure this doesn't get pigeonholed as a demonstration or a project, but really thinking through more broadly what that looks like across the board. And then my next slide, just want to say at the Healthcare for the Homeless Council, we're doing training and technical assistance, research and analysis to try to figure out how to best serve people with our clients with healthcare services. Please let us know if we can help in any of this space, but just want to give a shout out to the 300 Healthcare for the Homeless programs that are out in the country. We served 1 million patients last year, and we're doing our best during a very hard time during this pandemic. Thanks for having me on here, and I'm happy to answer any questions about this project or more broadly about healthcare during COVID. Thanks.
Outstanding, Barbara. Thank you so much. We have a question here. Let's see. There was a question. Where was that now? Give me a second. I'm looking for it here. The question was, Barbara, it'd be really helpful to know how these communities were pre-positioned to make a difference that other more calcitrant communities, let's call them, could. Can you comment about what made these communities sort of well pre-positioned to make a difference?
I will say that each of these communities were in a different space at the beginning of the pandemic. In Atlanta, they've long had collaborations with the CDC just because they're there in the backyard, but extending that into Morehouse and into Emory was new. In Chicago, bringing people together in that charge collaborative that I talked about was very new. And we certainly had shelter-based programs, but really weren't part of the larger shelter structure and the operation and governance of that. So that's how that's changed. And I would say in Connecticut, they were very frank in saying that they had long wanted to do more in their shelters with healthcare providers, but just really had never gotten around to it again. And that we all know what it's like to have everyday crises. And this really forced them to get serious about longstanding intentions. So I think each of them really found ways to maximize where they were, but they were all in different spaces. And by far, they were not all best friends before they launched into this.
Another question here is, are there any studies on the effect of impending eviction during a pandemic on mental health that you're aware of?
Yes, there have been a number of studies that I have seen looking at the stress levels, the mental health implications, and frankly, I would even broaden that to its impact on chronic health, chronic disease, and health conditions like diabetes and hypertension, which are extremely vulnerable to stress. And so I think that we're seeing illness on the rise in many ways because people are absolutely terrified of where they're going to lay their head next month or this month. And so that's something that I think concerns us all because we're here on this call.
Okay, so a number of folks have asked during the course of this call if we'll be sharing this presentation, and the answer to that is that we will be. Let's see. There's a question here, did any of these jurisdictions have success in supporting permanent housing outcomes, housing stabilization for families with children experiencing homelessness? In Massachusetts, we see a lot more low barrier housing options available for unaccompanied adults, but there's very little success in developing housing first models for families with children experiencing homelessness.
I am not confident about whether the housing opportunities that had been put in place. In Atlanta, they had 200 vouchers that they targeted specifically to this population. I don't know if those included families specifically. I know in Chicago also they're housed 170 people fairly quickly and are scaling that to 2,500. I would imagine that does include families, but I am just not sure from this point.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much. And I do have, Sarah just posted to all participants, hopefully you've seen it, that the House Education and Labor Committee just released their bill. It does include $4.5 billion for utility assistance. So that's an update from Sarah from earlier on. Just taking a look here and seeing if Representative Cleaver has joined us. Doesn't look like just yet. I'm wondering if I could bring back, first of all, Barbara, thank you just so much for this presentation. It's incredibly informative, and the resource is just super valuable. We really appreciate your collaboration on the framework. We're pleased to be part of the consortium of groups that are working on that, and I just appreciate your work so much. So thank you for presenting today, and thank you for all of your work on this issue.
Thank you for having me.
Sure. So, and I should mention, Barbara, that a number of things, comments that have been made in the chat is just how much people thank you for the work you're doing and for this presentation. So thank you again. Okay, just double checking. I want to ensure that I'm not holding up Representative Cleaver, but it doesn't look like he's joined us yet. I'm wondering if I could switch back to Sarah, if she's still with us here. Who might talk a little bit about next steps we were going to do at the end of this call, but next steps for housing advocates. What do you want housing advocates to do now during this period? We're waiting for the legislation to move through, the reconciliation legislation to move through. What should folks be doing?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mentioned before that things are moving really quickly, but I should have mentioned just how little room for error there is for Democrats to get this bill through. In the Senate, Democrats have 50 votes. They're going to need every single senator to go along with this bill. And so it is really important that folks are reaching out to their members of Congress, especially their senators right now, to urge them to support this bill moving forward. There's going to be enormous pressure, especially on more moderate Democrats, to not vote for it. There's going to be pressure on more progressive Democrats to be pushing for more. At the end of the day, we need to make sure that every single Democrat votes for the bill, and hopefully we can get some Republicans on too. I'll also say that if you have a member of Congress who's on the House Financial Services Subcommittee, it will be extremely important for you to be calling them this week or sending them an email this week, maybe even today or tomorrow or Wednesday, to encourage them to vote no on any harmful amendments. That's a process that could really trip up the committee as they're moving forward on this bill. I think it's hard to know exactly what we expect on those amendments, although I'm sure we'll see some amendments that go to cut funding for these programs. Maybe we'll see amendments to bar undocumented people from being able to receive any of this assistance. So all of those are really important that Democrats, again, hold together and vote no on any harmful amendments.
Great, thank you, Sarah. Okay, we're going to call a little bit of an audible. I'll be Tom Brady here. And I think we do not have Representative Cleaver on just yet.
I can reach out to them and I'll let you know as soon as he is on.
Okay. Meantime, we will jump around with the person managing the PowerPoint slides is trying to move around here with me. And I'll ask Faith Schwartz, who is at the Housing Finance Strategies. I knew Faith when she was working on the foreclosure crisis back in 2008, 2009, 2010. And she's going to talk to us a little bit about a national COVID-19 borrower awareness campaign. And I will just say, Faith, I will apologize ahead of time. If the congressman joins us, I may need to interrupt and come back to you. So
that's all right with me. And I'm glad to be here and happy to round it up at the end if we get interrupted. So thanks so much. I am so pleased to be here. I just love following all of your work here and sometimes just listen in for all the late breaking news, and you're the voice of those without a voice. So it's a pleasure to be here. As was mentioned, I lead an advisory group, Housing Finance Strategies, but I'm here today to talk a little bit about a campaign I'm helping lead for our industry with the nonprofits in our government around reaching borrowers who've been impacted by COVID and have either not gone into forbearance because they don't understand the CARES Act rights that they have as borrowers who have a government loan, and may be in trouble due to the pandemic, and also to help reach borrowers and heighten their awareness about their options coming out of what we call forbearance. And if any of those of you on the call, you're probably aware forbearance in itself is a term that is hard for people to understand. Does that mean it's forgiveness? Is it a deferral of the payment? When does it have to be repaid? And so through a coalition meeting with the Urban Institute, who has brought disparate people together, with different backgrounds, nonprofits, business leaders, and others, we kind of all came to the conclusion we are really missing something we had in place at the last crisis, which was the Hope Now Alliance that I led in 2008, to really pull together as an industry and in different cross-sector entities that would help borrowers in trouble and get better communications out there. So that's what I'm going to talk about, and happy to flip to the next slide. Yeah, the next slide, I think. Yep. So real quick, this is brief, but I want you to know but what you can walk away from this, if any of you are dealing with borrowers that are in homes, have loans, that are stressed out and don't understand, for whatever reason, can't get in touch with their lender, their servicer, even a nonprofit that might be able to help them. COVIDhelpforhome.org is what you should take from this. That link, if you're a nonprofit, allows you to leverage the material that's on that website. It's been donated to this effort. Will help borrowers understand some processes and additional resources on what they should expect from their loan servicer. We work closely with the CFPB as well as leading banks and servicers, as well as nonprofits, to come together and pull together material that was blessed and co-branded by the government and the private sector to reach borrowers who are scared to talk to their lenders and loan servicers. Now 10 years ago, this was a much bigger issue in a sense. I mean, there were millions of people that it was a housing crisis, sometimes led by products and kind of poor decisions and things. And of course, we know that's not what this is. This is a pandemic, and everyone's been impacted as a result of a health crisis. So it's different, and it's not quite as sizable, but it's important. There are still millions of people not paying on their mortgages and having relief based on the CARES Act. But what we're seeing through the data, there are people that are either for whatever reason haven't raised their hand to go into the protections they have that the government by statute has allowed for them to not pay their mortgage if they can't. And then for those who are in the deferral and forbearance, they're not sure what to do. What does it mean? Because all they know is they got some relief, but now the debt is piling up that they aren't paying. Taxes and insurance are being unpaid. And what we do know is there was an agreement for 12 months, up to 12 months, to defer those payments. And March and April are coming around, and we're going to see a sizable amount of consumers who are in these loans coming to their 12-month forbearance deadlines. These are Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac loans, FHA, VA, and USDA rural loans, and all government kind of backed loans. And then, as many of you may know, there are other private loans that are also getting this treatment, but they probably have some different outcomes on how to repay. So what we did was we pulled together this campaign through dedicated resources. It's all pro bono. And we built a website donated by Riskman, which was a great firm out in Virginia who built the website for us so that anyone could go in and grab materials and use them through their images on how to reach borrowers. And the reason, again, this is not news to many on the phone, but there are a lot of unanswered texts, mailings, emails to borrowers, even Federal Express packages that never get opened if they're sent by a bank or a loan servicer. And while the numbers are better, this is just kind of a really normal persistent issue, and we're trying to break that. We're saying let's work with the federal government, the CFPB, who has an official, sense of people respond to officials more than they do through their banker. And so, okay, it sounds like we're going to get our services. Just go to the next slide if you would, so we'll show that.
You know
I
what,
think that,
Faith, can
yes.
can I actually interrupt you just
Of course.
right here, and we'll come right back
Of
to this.
course.
We'll come right back to this slide. I
Sure,
promise you.
perfect.
All
Thanks.
right, thank you very much, Faith. And thanks for the second audible that we've called here. So Representative Emanuel Cleaver, a Democrat representing Missouri's 5th District, serves as the chair of the Housing and Insurance Subcommittee on the House Financial Services Committee. In 2016, as ranking member of the subcommittee, Representative Cleaver successfully co-authored the largest, most sweeping reform bill on housing programs in 20 years, the Housing Opportunity Through Modernization Act, a comprehensive bipartisan housing bill that passed into law with a unanimous vote. When was the last time that happened? He's been a strong advocate for affordable housing for low-income people throughout his career, and as such was awarded NLIHC's Edward Brooke Housing Leadership Award in 2019. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Representative Emanuel Cleaver. Representative? I think you may be on, there we go.
Hello?
Hi, we can hear you now.
Oh, okay. Let me see if I can start the camera. Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah, this is just a call,
Oh,
Congressman
okay.
Cleaver, so we don't have a camera.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you for allowing me a few minutes to talk to you about affordable housing. It is and has been an issue with me before I even realized it was an issue, because my background is that I didn't live in a house with even electricity or running water till I was about 6, and we moved. My family moved into public housing when I was 7. We stayed there 5 years. My dad worked 3 jobs so we could get a house, so he could buy a house in a white neighborhood and have it moved to the black neighborhood. Now, the shack that I lived in was actually 26 minutes from the Omni Hotel in downtown Dallas. I was down there to speak last year, and I rented a car just to drive to take another look at it. So this is what I've always wanted to do since I was elected to Congress, and that was to chair the housing, community development, and insurance subcommittee. My staff and I are getting ready to submit the first memo to the chair of the committee, laying out a very ambitious kind of a program that we're going to bring forth. And one of them will involve you guys, and that is, as we move through this, I've made a commitment to do something that has not been done, and that is, we're going to have on every housing issue, we're going to have a roundtable with individuals who are involved in the advocacy community, and then I'll meet with Republicans and Democrats in hopes that we can get legislation that would actually make it through the Senate. And by that I mean, look, we can get legislation through the House, but the real mark of legislating right now is whether we want to do something that makes us feel good in the House of Representatives. That we had something approved, and it just dies a natural death where so many pieces of legislation have been buried, or do we try to fashion a process that would almost assure a positive response on the Senate side? And of course the White House, I think, would be right on board. So one of the things we have been successful, I think, in getting money into the affordable housing section of the next stimulus package. I'm not sure how that's going to look in the final analysis. The Financial Services Committee had a meeting today, and we talked about it briefly, mainly because of an amendment I'm putting into the legislation for rural housing, which, by the way, I think you know, if we have some natural allies in rural America. Most people probably don't realize that somebody said this today in an earlier meeting, I represent probably a larger rural area than any member of the Congressional Black Caucus or the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. And one of the things that I've learned is that you know, rural America is struggling with the same housing issues, affordable housing issues that we are in urban America. And the more we can get people to understand that there is, in fact, a symbiotic relationship between the urban core and rural America, we can get a lot of things done, even past housing. But tragically, we've had people that have worked with great intentionality, trying to make sure that that there is no realization of our kinship. But affordable housing is one of the real reasons. One of the things that I'm going to deal with in terms of the housing is with public housing. You know, we are trying. I'm going to try to get the government to move to create new housing. You know, as many of you probably know, as it relates to public housing, the only thing we've been doing is replacing units. It's almost been a one-for-one replacement. You know, when we had Katrina, we had to rebuild almost one entirely new housing development, but we only created the same number of units that was in existence. And at some point, we're going to have to stretch out a bit. And then we've got to come up with, and I think there are some ways to do it. So, you know, some tax incentives to try to increase developer interest in the urban core, because if the average home costs $225,000 in Kansas City, you know, a developer can buy a piece of property and build a house, but he or she is going to have difficulty getting someone who can afford to buy it in the urban core. So we've got to figure out ways in which to do that with, you know, tax credits, and there are some other things that I'm not at liberty to talk about now that may be even more significant as you know the weeks pass by. But I hope to have a longstanding relationship with the National Low Income Housing Coalition. I intend to and hope you guys would be available to sit down in one of my roundtables where we you know, hammer out issues. All of this would be before anything goes to the floor. Whenever I take a bill to the floor, my policy in the past has been it's not to, you know, make a statement or create some talking points or political messaging. I want to pass some legislation. I'll end with this by telling you, we were able to get into my legislation 2 years ago that individuals living in public housing, for example, could have a savings plan, and they could save money without having to worry about an increase in the cost of the rental cost at the unit. When we lived in public housing, if my dad got a raise, then the rent went up, and you know, even though the rent was light, so was the salary. So what we've done now is that we're allowing people to have you know, savings policies or savings plans, and that will not count against your will not cause you to have to pay an increase in housing. And there are a lot of little things that we can do, but there are also some big things. Anyway, I'm through.
Thank you so much, Representative Cleaver. I know your time is very tight. I don't know if you have any time for questions. I want to be respectful of your time. If you have to get off, that's fine. If you have a moment or two.
Sure.
Okay. Great. Well, first of all, just thank you. Thank you so much for all of your words and all of your leadership in Congress. You're absolutely right about, affordable housing is not just an urban thing. It's a rural thing. There's definitely symbiosis and kinship there that should be elevated. And we couldn't agree more about creating more new affordable housing, be it expanding public housing, investing in the National Housing Trust Fund, and so forth. Just a couple of quick questions. What would you say to all the people on this call, the advocates from around the country, NLIC members and our partners? What should they be doing to ensure that Congress passes the next COVID relief package and that it includes robust resources for housing and homelessness?
Well, I know people don't think that it matters, but it does, because I've seen all kinds of politicians. I've seen tall ones, short ones, large ones, skinny ones, but I've never seen one that couldn't count. And so, letters matter, and because most members are just like me, and that is, when I have my staff meeting, and I'll have one later today with my full staff from the rural areas in Higginsville, from my Higginsville office, Washington, and here in Kansas City. And when we'll start off asking about the letters that we have received as it relates to impeachment, and with the number of letters we received on just about any major issue or minor issue for that matter that we're dealing with. So you can write letters. That's really going to be important and helpful. I think because of the structure right now, we're going to get affordable housing in the stimulus. I don't think there's any question about it. The only issue is how much we're going to get, and of course how flexible those dollars are going to be. Rental assistance, which we were able to get approved in this past December, is already out. I called the county executive 2 weeks ago, Frank White, and told him that our county is going to get 11 million and the city is getting 14 million. It's a difficult deal because most people, there's an apprehension about landlords. And so it's, we've got to kind of walk between the raindrops in that we have to try to make sure we take care of making sure that landlords are not throwing people out in the snow. At the same time, we've got to make sure that landlords are able to stay in business, since they, and I'm not talking about the big corporate landlords. The majority of landlords are individuals like a friend of mine, Leon Dixon, who bought a duplex and he lives in one side and he rents out the other side, and that's retirement income. So we got to make sure that we do keep in mind that landlords are in this deal, but we got to make sure that the landlords are not taking advantage of the renters. So we are right now trying to, the city is right now with some input from me, deciding who's going to handle the money for the rental assistance program. The county gave their money to the United Way, and I'm assuming that they're going to allow their agencies, some of their agencies, to respond.
Outstanding. Congressman, I want to assure you, when you said, you hope the National Low-Income Housing Coalition will join you for, the roundtables you'll hold, that absolutely we will be there anytime that you want our input on anything related to affordable housing. By all means, reach out to us. Josh Lynn, a constituent of yours in Kansas City, who thanked you for your leadership, is also asking, will the roundtables be focused nationally or locally or both? it sounds like it'll be national. Will it also include local partners?
Yeah, one of the problems, the day I was elected chair of the housing committee, one of the members walked straight over to me, like maybe 10 seconds, and said, "You got to come to Brooklyn. I got a problem with their public housing. It's awful. You got to come see this." And so I told the staff, one of the problems is that I've got to take a national perspective, look at everything from a national perspective. But also, I still represent the 5th District of Missouri, so I'm going to have to obviously spend time here with some of these issues. But this is, we got all of the 50 states, plus we have housing problems in some of our territories. The U.S. Virgin Islands, Guam, for example. The representative from Guam is actually on my committee, and Puerto Rico is struggling right now. In fact, we have money in the stimulus right now that's earmarked for Puerto Rico. So yeah, most of what I'm doing has to be on a national basis. All the legislation obviously has to be national.
Right. So there's one more question I was going to get to, but in respect of your time, I'll just pose it as a strong encouragement, and that is that affordable housing be part of any rural development request that you're part of, and that it be included, affordable housing be included in any infrastructure funding package that that moves forward.
I'm glad you brought that up, because about 6 months ago we had this discussion with the chair, and we have proposed a new definition for infrastructure because we think that if there's an infrastructure bill, and there very well may be, the highway system is crumbling, that we have already moved from our committee. It hasn't been accepted by the House, that a new definition for infrastructure, for national infrastructure, would include housing, affordable housing. And so because we think that it is an inseparable part of being a human, to live in affordable, decent, and sanitary housing. So thank you very much for that statement, because that fits right with what we're doing. And Maxine Waters, the chair of the Financial Services Committee, is obsessed with it. And I think we will be able to get something significant like that out of our committee onto the floor at the appropriate time, when if there's an infrastructure bill, which I mean we need desperately in this country. I mean, we haven't had a serious infrastructure bill in over a decade.
Representative Cleaver, thank you so much. That's music to our ears. Everything you've spoken about today has been. We thank you so much for joining our call and for your leadership in Congress. You're a real champion for low-income people and for their affordable housing, and we thank you so much for that leadership. Thanks.
Well, I look forward to working with you.
All right, take care. All right, we will get back now to Faith Schwartz and try to find the slide where she was on. Thank you.
That's okay. I'll keep it kind of brief, because I think if people go to that website, it's 80% of what will be helpful to understand, covidhelpforhome.org. I would just make a few observations. We came up with this tagline and these images after looking at it as first, like the industry, what did they like about several different images that one company's marketing department donated, and with several taglines to suggest a campaign. We then worked with the NeighborWorks America, Marietta Rodriguez, who I worked with 10 years ago during the first crisis, and they pulled together consumer group, focus groups, counseling groups and direct-to-consumer focus groups to ask them about all the different images and taglines that were suggested for getting people's attention. Long story short, they came up with a totally separate one than the industry did. So always wise to ask the people who you're trying to, focus on to get you feedback. And this is what we came up with. It was more empathetic, more thoughtful, and also directing them with the CFPB to good, safe resources. So next slide, please. I would just say none of this would have been done if we didn't also get the buy-in from the Mortgage Bankers Association, American Bankers Association, NeighborWorks, Urban Institute, Housing Policy Council. The realtors were partly involved, several nonprofit groups, L.E. Pepper, National Housing Conference. The Mr. Cooper group did a lot of hard work to get this off the ground. It's all pro bono. There is no funding for this, so we're pulling it together. And just this past weekend, we supported the Mortgage Bankers Association's efforts in Memphis around affordable housing, and we reached into it to try to reach all borrowers at risk and behind on their mortgage payments into this campaign. And so several servicers came together and had 2 days worth of Zoom calls with borrowers. And, it was interesting, just like a decade ago, it's always remarkable for the first time for servicers after 9 months to connect with a borrower in one new try. And this campaign helped them do that through Zoom, some nonprofit agencies in Chicago that were helpful in arranging the technology to the Zoom rooms, and then several servicers who were participating. And we focused on a little market, a larger market, but the idea was to use it as an example. And sure enough, 21 families got help, and the issues were what might seem to be simple for those of us closer to it. They didn't understand what forbearance meant. They were in forbearance. They didn't know what to ask for, what to be thinking about as they were coming out. And just to level set with everyone, when you come out, if you don't have pretty good information about all the different options, you can really get caught with a repayment plan that is not commensurate with what you can afford. If you have equity in your home and it makes sense, defer the payment on the back end and then resume your initial payment. That'll be adjusted upward from missed taxes and insurance. And all the federal agencies, for all the good work they do, the public policy issue there is it's not all lined up against one another. It's different. So there are different solutions coming out of forbearance for FHA versus Fannie Mae versus VA versus USDA Rural and Freddie Mac. So long story short, we're working through the industry and the agencies to have a better communication to make sure that no one's left behind. And while this isn't the millions of people that we dealt with before, there are a couple million that are past due on their mortgages, and we are worried about the next wave given the recent unemployment, that people stop looking for work, and what's happening in the mortgage cycles. We're looking at limited English proficiency and how to link into the CFPB on that. We're looking at possibly hosting events across the country, city by city, if it makes sense and we get the support of nonprofits as well as the servicers. And we're kind of in high gear because of the pending emergence from forbearance, people coming out of that deferred payment. And it's really going to be a little bit of a litmus test for servicers, nonprofits, and our government to look closely at all the policies that were enacted during COVID and to see how well they'll work on the back end. I would also say, as you heard today a little bit about it earlier on, the extension of forbearance is in play by the investors. It's possible up to 18 months, but under the CARES Act, it's up to 12 months. So there's some kind of varying degrees of moratoriums on evictions, foreclosures, and suggestions that will get extended, but we're kind of in a tight time frame and there's a lot of people coming out right now. So the point here is we're here to help. It is again a voluntary effort, but we have kind of mimicked what we did when there was more of a public mandate to do the same thing a decade ago. So we're trying to learn from the past, keep it simple, but be very helpful, not let anyone fall through the cracks, certainly because they don't understand their options. So I think that's it. I don't know if that's helpful, Paul. I
Very
didn't.
good. Yes, thank you, Faith. Thank
Okay.
you so much. Please give my regards to my friends at NeighborWorks. And
Okay.
I will just say, along the lines of what Faith has been talking about, as Sarah mentioned before, in the new COVID relief package, there is just shy, I think, of $10 billion for homeowner assistance, particularly foreclosure prevention. So hopefully we'll get that across the finish line. Thank you so much for joining us today, Faith.
You bet. Thank you.
Okay. All right, we will move on now to our first field update. And we're joined by Eric Huffnagel from Michigan Coalition Against Homelessness. Eric.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. Good to join you. Been asked today to talk a little bit about some of the issues that we're encountering in the state of Michigan with respect to access of the federal funding through the most recent stimulus package. So wanted to just talk to you a little bit about what we're encountering and what steps we're currently taking. First of all, I wanted to give a little background or context. Some of you are familiar with what's taken place with respect to funding and the allocations that states are getting, et cetera. But just to give you the lay of the land, in Michigan, we were receiving over $600 million from the Federal Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2021 that was passed. We're looking at $621 million, which is a net figure. About $30 million was going to two specific local units of government that applied directly to Treasury for funds. So at the state level, through dollars that would be distributed through our State Housing Development Authority, we have $621 million waiting to be used. Wanted to also put things in context by talking about how we had used dollars out of the previous federal allocation through the CARES Act. Michigan communities were equipped to get the money out the door quickly. A statewide eviction diversion program was established in late 2020 through the CARES Act funding. The State Housing Development Authority and homeless service providers were very active in putting that together, a lot of front end work making that happen. But that was successfully built. The programming and the infrastructure that really provided a strategic coordinated response to the looming eviction crisis in Michigan. And just as an explanation of how that worked, as part of that initiative, Michigan homeless service providers were able to utilize nearly $50 million in rental assistance funds that came through the CARES Act. The program was successful. Eviction filings across the state were down approximately 40% from August to October when compared to the previous year. And about 85% of the households that utilized the eviction diversion program assistance fell in the very low income bracket. So those who were in most need benefited the most from that. So we were able to get the money out the door, even though you had the front end infrastructure build out, to be able to get it to those most in need before the deadline rolled around for the end date of encumbering those funds. As we look at the $621 million that the state is going to be able to access, we know that Congress is requiring that 65% of the original grant be obligated by September 30th of 2021. At that time, we know that if you don't have the 65,000 or 65% committed, that those dollars will be recaptured. So we're thinking in terms of how are we going to make sure those dollars get out and get obligated at least 65%, so we don't lose anything. So we really think time is of the essence here when we look at that 621 million. In order to reach that 65% threshold deadline, we'd really need to obligate those dollars, about $50 million each month. And that's if the program had started at the beginning of this month, February 1st. And if we wait until March 1st, that monthly amount increases to 60 million and so on. So every day wasted could literally cost our state millions of dollars. So let's talk about the fly in the ointment. The good news is $621 million being available to the state of Michigan to assist people in crisis. We are encountering legislative politics, which is unusual. I'm sure none of your states encounter that. So we're probably the exception Um, I'm being facetious there. But we have a situation where we have a Democratic governor. Most of you have heard her name in the media because of some of the outlandish things that have happened, including the plot to kidnap and kill her. Governor Whitmer has been at odds with the Republican-led House and Senate. Again, Republicans are in charge of the House and the Senate, have the majority of both. Republicans really have taken great umbrage at the governor for her swift action and really, I would say, decisive action with respect to the COVID-19 response, dating back to the early stages back in March of 2020. She took a significant amount of action via executive action rather than working with the legislature through legislative action. A lot of that had to do with the difference of opinion about lockdowns, et cetera. And so there has been a point of contention since last March, and the ongoing power struggle continues. So with a new legislative session, we have new leadership in both the House and the Senate, and they've come out swinging. They've been very straightforward in public about intending to get the governor to, in essence, bow to their will through any means necessary. So these efforts have included a couple of things more recently. One has to do with the use of the appropriations process. So in essence, we'll give you the dollars if you give us more power. And then another example is even going so far as to refuse to act on gubernatorial appointments. So the House Majority Leader, Mike Cherke, said, quote, "It's not a gesture to score points, but a gesture to make a point. Until the governor stops acting unilaterally and invests and encourages the legislature to be part of more of these decisions, then when we're going to be using the tools available to us." So, the gauntlet had been cast down early. So this is where the federal recovery package comes into play. As I view it, when we think about the appropriations process at the state level, releasing the federal recovery funding, I think we're really talking about housing assistance here, and release of these funds as being largely perfunctory in nature. The legislature doesn't agree. The legislature, again, House and Senate, run through Republicans, has failed to take action, even though the $621 million is there and waiting to go. And it's despite the kinds of concerns that we, as a statewide organization, and others have raised regarding what we believe to be urgent needs that most of you, I think, could agree with, that both families are in need, but we're also characterizing this as impacting landlords as well, that we think it's important to help to sustain housing for families, but also to ensure that landlords are also not damaged in this process of the eviction moratorium period, because we want to have partners that we work with in the future. So, again, the concerns about any delay affecting our ability to commit that 65% of the funds by September 30th deadline, where we're potentially risking the potential loss of tens of millions of dollars in the state. The House Appropriations Committee has actually moved forward with releasing 25% of the funds. So this is how they're approaching it. They're not going to provide the whole allocation. They're just going to meter it out over time. The Senate Appropriations Committee, however, doesn't even have anything on their calendar relating to this. So they have not even pushed this forward at this point. It's only the House Appropriations Committee. So we're putting some feelers out to see where the Senate is on it. In the meantime, we really know that the House and the Senate, the Republican side, is playing politics with this. They've indicated the appropriations chair, who's a Republican, indicates that he's willing to use, quote, "the power of the purse strings," unquote, to preserve the checks and balances in government. Yet, in the other breath, he's saying they want to make sure that the money gets out there and to the people who need it as quickly as possible. So we are at a point where we don't have movement on it. We have been communicating with our legislative leaders. We put out a call to action and asked individuals to reach out to their legislators. And we've had folks from the districts of the chair of the Senate and the House Appropriations Committee reach out. And most recently, we've had Alyssa Slotkin, Representative Alyssa Slotkin's office, contact us to let us know that the Michigan delegation has actually put out a letter led by Senator Stabenow asking for action to be taken immediately. And then beyond that, we're looking at how we might be able to influence things through press release and the media work that we're doing. I've talked with City Lab, a reporter from City Lab who's also interested in this issue, which, by the way, if any of you are dealing with it in your states, would certainly like to hear from you so that I can pass along your information to that reporter so that they can raise visibility about this issue if it's being encountered in other states. So I'm sorry for taking up so much of your time. I did breathe a couple of times in there, but would be happy to answer questions if there is time and there is an interest. If not, I'm available at any point outside of this call.
Thank you, Eric. That's a sobering report. The political games that you're talking about are very, very frustrating to hear about. The fact that you were having these issues that you had told us about them was the reason we wanted to have you on the call. So in the House, they've allocated or are about to release or approve for release 25% of the funds, but you say the Senate does not have it on its schedule, and the funds can't move unless the Senate meets and the House and the Senate come together in agreement?
Yeah, correct. You have to have the House Appropriations Committee take action as well as the Senate Appropriations Committee. So there has to be that action at the legislative level, and then it has to be signed by the governor. And so those two pieces at the legislative level haven't happened.
And is there, as you're engaging your advocacy work, you know, what are the prospects for getting all of this to occur quickly? Which you know, you made a really great point that, you know, time is of the essence here. What are your feeling? Are you just demoralized? Do you really believe that you'll be able to get this done in the next, I don't know, several weeks, month and a half?
Yeah, I would say demoralized. I think we've really been confused by this because some of the comments that are made about trying to ensure that there's transparency and accountability doesn't make sense to us, because there is transparency and accountability when we think about these dollars and how they are monitored through the Michigan State Housing Development Authority, but then also through Treasury as well. It was transparent and accountability was there with the first round of funding for the eviction diversion program. So that doesn't make any sense. We didn't have any legislators reaching out to us or any other stakeholders to get input where any of those issues would have been raised to talk through those. So we're scratching our heads trying to understand exactly what's happening. It seems like a smokescreen, and we're just waiting for the appropriate pressure to help grease the wheels a little bit to get some action. So we're thinking with all of these things happening, with having folks in the field, the ground game moving, with having now members of Congress from Michigan who will be trying to reach out as well. They can provide some leverage, and then the public opinion is always something that is important. So working with the media to help raise the issue, we think all of those things together will provide some leverage to get some movement on it.
Well, good luck, Eric. And I couldn't agree more about the media getting the public to be aware of this issue, and then reaching out also to legislators about, this isn't just about renters, this is about landlords as well. So good luck, and please keep us up to date. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Welcome, Paul.
Okay, we'll move on now to Pamela Schwartz from Western Massachusetts Network to End Homelessness. Pamela, are you with us?
I am. Good afternoon. Good to be here. Thanks for the invitation. I'm going to take a few minutes and talk about the post-Massachusetts eviction moratorium reality, the landscape, what we're facing here in Massachusetts that may be helpful to others across the country. I'll start with the passage of the Massachusetts eviction moratorium last April. You may recall it was the most comprehensive in the nation. We were proud of that. I can't continue without giving a shout out to our leading partners who made that happen. Two of whom are on this call, Attorney Andrea Park from the Mass Law Reform Institute, and private tenant attorney Joel Feldman, as well as Homes for All Massachusetts Coalition, a group of grassroots organizers who really led an incredible effort in partnership with progressive legislative leadership and got this bill signed by a Republican governor. The eviction moratorium did include 2 opportunities for extension. The governor exercised that opportunity once, but not again. He had exclusive authority to extend, and unfortunately he chose not to. So the moratorium ended on October 17th. As a result of that decision, advocates pressed hard for passage of what we call the Housing Stability Act. This would have created a COVID legal defense, as in if the reason for eviction was COVID related, for instance, non-payment due to loss of a job, you could not be evicted, although you could still seek rent payment through other legal recourse, but it was an eviction defense. And the goal was simply to keep non-payment issues out of the eviction process while using federal funds to provide relief to landlords directly to supplement tenant programs and provide faster stabilization. So the goal was to protect tenants and to protect small landlords. Unfortunately, the landlord lobby pushed back hard against the bill, arguing it was a continuation of the moratorium, which it wasn't, but that is sort of their refrain for any kind of eviction protection and prevention. The governor, as it turned out, was committed to a different plan and announced his eviction diversion initiative, which is a multi-pronged response that includes increased rental assistance funds, along with legal assistance and community mediation programs. This was a good step forward. This is a good thing. However, it wasn't nearly sufficient to address the crisis, as is evidenced in the numbers, the raw numbers. Since the moratorium was lifted, well over 7,000 new eviction cases have been filed in Massachusetts courts. That's on top of the thousands of eviction cases that were put on hold by the moratorium, not to mention the countless residents that have left their homes under threat or fear of eviction. So eviction diversion initiative doesn't do the trick. It helps, but we know we have a tremendous gap. So after the eviction diversion initiative plan was announced, advocates turned their attention to the state budget process, which in Massachusetts allows for substantive legislation to be adopted, and due to COVID was significantly delayed. Usually our budget is adopted as of July 1, and it was being debated and passed in the month of December. We all pressed for the adoption of the Housing Stability Act through that budget process. And unfortunately, that did not happen. But what did happen on December 31st with the signing of the state budget was the win of a couple of important protections. And they included the requirement of a continuance or postponement of an eviction proceeding if a rental assistance application had been filed. It prevented a judgment of execution if a rental assistance application had been filed. So this was an important and is an important protection. Also in the law that was adopted on December 31st, there is the requirement that a notice to quit must include the bold language that this is not an eviction. So that there it is in bold print for tenants to comprehend that this notice does not mean they must leave their apartment now. It also requires inclusion of referral of tenants to rental assistance. It advises them of the CDC moratorium. It also included a broad data reporting requirement, which included the uploading of the notice to quit itself. So this could be tracked, like what are these notices to quits looking like, and notices to quit, I should say, and also required reporting on evictions and executions. So this exists now, this is happening now. And as a result, we have our first report. The first trial court report was released 2 weeks ago for the month of December. And sadly, but necessarily, we see that in the month of December alone, 449 executions for dispossession were issued. This is the piece of paper that a landlord can hand to a sheriff saying you must be out within 48 hours. That number, 449 executions for possession, happened in December alongside these various protections. So, let me correct that. I mean, we know that the legal assistance program had been in existence by then. Unfortunately, the initial number, which we know is not exactly on point because it's too early to capture all of the representation that tenants had obtained, and there's an administrative gap. However, this report, it is in the trial court report that 0.9% of tenants were represented as compared to 71% of landlords. Now, while that's not, we think that number is not correct and that it would be higher, there's absolute consensus that there will be at the end of the day a massive gap between representation for tenants and representation by landlords. So where are we now? As the new legislative session begins, the legislation filing deadline is now February 19th, pushed back due to COVID. We advocates are focused on a new iteration of housing stability laws to address the current emergency, as well as passage of bills to anticipate the housing instability crisis that we're facing for the coming years. So we know it's in draft form, but we know now that the bill will continue to try to keep cases out of court through requiring landlords to seek rental assistance, providing the most vulnerable with a defense to eviction, while also creating a requirement for just cause for eviction. It will also target new federal rental assistance funds, the kind that we were just hearing about from our prior speaker, to the hardest hit people, making the application process as easy as possible and allowing maximum flexibility in allocating funds, such as allowing payments to go directly to tenants. So, and on other fronts, we'll continue to push the bills for right to counsel on evictions and eviction record sealing, recognizing the need for these institutional changes to happen to create long-term housing stability. So the bottom line is we know that the reality is that while there are meaningful resources on the ground now, they cannot begin to keep up with demand, whether that's tenants being lost through language barriers, Zoom challenges, immigration concerns, and more. And we know the only way through this pandemic safely is to keep the courts out of the public health response to this pandemic. So we're going to be continuing to work on that in these coming months. And I welcome any questions or comments, and happy for you all to be connected with the network. I see on the screen here, we've got the slide to our blog, and happy to be in touch about any of the work that's going on in Massachusetts. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Pamela. Outstanding presentation and outstanding work that you're doing there. Wish you the very best of success with your new legislative session. A very sobering summary of the past couple of months. There was a question here, just quickly, if you have the bill number of the legislation about linking emergency dollars with the eviction prevention. Person says, I can't remember the name of the bill.
Yeah, you mean we don't have the one that's in draft form. No, I mean, if that's what's coming down the pike, we don't have yet. It's still, we have a deadline of February 19th. So I'm happy to share that with you when it comes out.
Okay, great. And do you have any, there's a question here about the eviction rate for the 3 months you were talking about compared to normal rates. Any sense of that
I
pre-COVID?
don't have that offhand. I don't have that. I see I've got Laura and Andrea on this call and they're in the chat. I don't know if you happen to have that data point, but I'm afraid I don't.
Okay, great. A fantastic presentation, as somebody put there in the chat. Laura Massey, fabulous presentation, Pamela. Thank you. It really was really comprehensive. Thank you so much for joining us on today's call. All right, that concludes our agenda. I just want to share with everybody, we welcome you to join our working group calls. This is a reminder. We have a policy legislative working group every Tuesday at 12:30 Eastern time. We have a working with FEMA working group Tuesdays at 3 p.m. Eastern time, and a state and local implementation working group at 3 p.m. on Wednesdays. Please feel free to join us. We also have a webinar call for residents, I should say, the first Monday of every month. You can find those on our coronavirus section of the nlihc.org website, and there's information there to register. You'll see what the times of the calls are. It'll say working group calls, and you just click on that and you'll see them. Please join us for those, and we look forward to chatting with you again next Monday. So thank you and be safe. Thanks. Bye-bye.